So today in this video we are going to talk about the production of the ATP in the glycolysis. So today we will discuss about the production of the ATP in the glucose metabolism in the glycolysis. How much ATP is produced in the aerobic glycolysis and how much ATP is produced in the anaerobic glycolysis, and we will also discuss the how much ATP is produced in the different subtle pathways. So before starting this video, if you haven't read the glycolysis pathway, then I want you to read the glycolysis pathway, and I want you to read the previous video. I want you to see the previous video, glycolysis metabolism, and write down in the copy the detailed pathway of the glycolysis, so that while discussing this production of the ATP in the glycolysis, that you will feel easy while comparing the different reaction and the production of the ATP. Now let us discuss. Now let us proceed towards the production of the ATP in glycolysis. So first let us discuss the consumption of the ATP. In the glycolysis, I have discussed that there are three phases. One is energy investment phase, one is splitting phase, and another is energy generation phase. And the net ATP production is energy generation phase total ATP minus energy consumption phase ATP. So now first let us discuss about the energy consumption phase. Here what happens, in the energy consumption phase, the two ATP are consumed in the reaction that are catalyzed by the hexokinase and phosphofructokinase, that is minus 2 ATP. Let us assume that is minus 2 ATP. Now you must know the reaction. While there is conversion of the glucose to glucose 6-phosphate by the enzyme hexokinase or glucokinase, 1 ATP is consumed, and another consumption of ATP take place while conversion of the glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate, and that fructose 6-phosphate, when converted to fructose 1,6 bis-phosphate, 1 ATP is consumed in the enzyme phosphofructokinase. So in those two reactions, 2 ATP are consumed in the reaction that are catalyzed by the hexokinase and phosphofructokinase. Now that is the energy investment phase. Now let us move towards the energy generation phase. In the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase reaction, 2 NADHs are produced, and those 2 NADHs pass to electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation occurs, leading to generation of the 6 ATP. That you should know. What happens? The glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is converted to 1,3 bis-phosphoglycerate by the enzyme glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase, and there is production of the NADH. As we know that the dihydroxyacetone phosphate is isomerized to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate by the enzyme phosphatidyl isomerase, and there is generation of the 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate molecule. So 2 NADH is produced, and that 2 NADH molecule moves towards the electron transport chain, producing the 6 ATP. So there is generation of the NADH, and that NADH goes towards the electron transport chain, producing 6 ATP. Another reaction is phosphoglycerate kinase reaction, that is the substrate level phosphorylation. In this reaction, 2 ATP are produced. In the substrate level reaction, what happened? 1,3 bis-phosphoglycerate is catalyzed by the phosphoglycerate kinase. Action by the phosphoglycerate kinase converted to 3-phosphoglycerate with the production of the ATP, that is the substrate level phosphorylation. So another reaction, that is reaction done by the pyruvate kinase. The pyruvate kinase, phosphoenol pyruvate is metabolized to pyruvate by the pyruvate kinase with the generation of the 2 ATP. That is also the substrate level phosphorylation. So now let us discuss. In the energy investment phase, 2 ATP is consumed, and the energy generation phase, 6 ATP plus 2 ATP plus 2 ATP, total 6 plus 2 plus 2, 10 ATP is produced. So 10 ATP minus 2 ATP, or you can simply do the math by minus 2 plus 6 plus 2 plus 2. So total 8 ATP is produced by the glucose in the glycolysis. Again, I am going to tell you, this 8 ATP is produced from the malate aspartate shuttle, because from the malate aspartate shuttle 3 ATP are produced from the 1 NADH, whereas in the glycerol phosphate shuttle 2 ATP is produced from 1 NADH in the electron transport chain. So in the malate aspartate shuttle, the net ATP synthesis in the glycolysis in the aerobic condition is total 8 ATP, and in the glycerol phosphate shuttle, the net ATP production is total 6 ATP, because minus 2 is 2 ATP is consumed from the energy investment phase, and in the glycerol phosphate shuttle 2 NADH is produced. 2 NADH is produced means 2 ATP from the 1 NADH, that means total 4 ATP is produced from 2 NADH, that means minus 2 plus 4 plus 2 plus 2 leads to production of the 6 ATP in the glycerol phosphate shuttle. So this is the total ATP synthesis in the aerobic condition in the glycolysis. So now let us discuss the net ATP production, the net ATP synthesis in the glycolysis in anaerobic condition. So we know that in anaerobic condition there is formation of the lactate and there is consumption of the NADH, which allows the regeneration of the NAD plus, which can be reused by the glycerol dihyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenate, that so that the glycolysis proceeds even in the absence of the oxygen to supply the ATP. So at the end what happens if there is anaerobic condition? The pyruvate is converted to lactate by the lactate dehydrogenate with the consumption of the NADH to produce the NAD plus. So total 6 ATP is consumed in the anaerobic condition as the last. So minus 2 in the energy investment phase, plus 6 production of the ATP, plus 2 phosphate level substitution by the phosphoglycerate kinase, plus 2 pyruvate kinase, that is substrate level phosphorylation, another substrate level phosphorylation, and at the end minus 6, because while production of the lactate from the pyruvate by the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase, the NADH is consumed and NAD plus is produced. So total 2 ATP is produced in the anaerobic condition. So as I have already said, 8 or 6 ATP is synthesized depending on the shuttle pathway in the aerobic condition. In the malate aspartate shuttle, total 8 ATP is produced, net 8 ATP is produced, and the glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle, net 6 ATP is produced. And also you have to take in mind that in the presence of the mitochondria and the oxygen, the NADH produced in the glycolysis can participate in the shuttle pathway. Again, I am going to tell you, for the shuttle pathway, for the synthesis of the ATP, if the cytosolic NADH uses the malate aspartate shuttle, 3 ATP are generated from the each molecule of NADH, which in contrast the glycerophosphate shuttle produces 2 ATP from the 1 NADH. And also you have to know that when the glycolysis occurs from the glycogen, one more ATP is generated. Because what happens? Because no ATP is consumed for the activation of the glucose, and glycogen directly produces glucose 6-phosphate, which from the glucose 6-phosphate, thus in anaerobic glycolysis 3 ATP are produced, and in the aerobic glycolysis total 9 ATP are produced if there is glycogen. So you have to know this very well. So this is the concept of the production of the ATP in glucose metabolism glycolysis. I hope you understood this lecture, and at the end I want to tell you that this red figures like glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase, I have said that from 2 NADs 6 ATP is produced, but in the bracket I have written in 5 because the values in the brackets in the red color represents the ATP synthesis as per new P:0 ratio of 2.5 ATP for NADH, and later on I will say that in citric acid cycle 1.5 ATP for FADH2. So in the glycolysis, as per new P:0 ratios, 2.5 ATP for 1 NADH. So this is the main thing you have to know. So this much for today. Thank you.